On a bitter, cold morning in rural Madison, Indiana, January 11th, 1992, a man driving along a remote gravel road came across something horrific, something he would never forget. What he found looked at first like the remains of a burnt mannequin. It wasn't. What he had found was the smoldering, unrecognizable body of a child, burned beyond belief. Arms clenched tightly to her chest, her shoes melted to the dirt. It took investigators hours to confirm that this was the body of Shanda Sharer, a 12-year-old girl who had gone missing just the night before. Her death would soon make headlines across the country, not only because of the sheer brutality of her murder, but because of who killed her. 4 teenage girls. The youngest was just 15. This wasn't the act of an unstable adult or a predatory stranger. This was a deliberate, prolonged, and deeply disturbing crime. One planned over days and executed with such cruelty that seasoned detectives and courtroom veterans described it as one of the most sadistic killings they had ever encountered. But Shanda's story isn't just about the crime. It's about a child full of life, a girl who had recently moved to a new town, who loved animals, who liked to dance and cheer and write notes to her friends. She had dreams. She had people who loved her. She was smart, kind, and full of light, and yet her life was snuffed out by a group of girls just barely older than her, girls she didn't really know. Girls driven by jealousy, manipulation, and something far darker. What happened to Shanda Sharer wasn't a sudden burst of violence. It was a calculated, torturous killing that lasted for hours. Shanda was lured from her home in the middle of the night. She was forced into a car, driven across multiple counties, terrorized, humiliated, stabbed, strangled, and finally, while still alive, burned in a field. And she begged for her life the entire time. To understand the horror of what happened, we first need to understand who it happened to. Shanda Renee Sharer was born on June 6, 1979 in Pineville, Kentucky. Her parents, Jacqueline Vaught and Stephen Sharer, separated when Shanda was still very young. After the divorce, Shanda primarily lived with her mother but maintained a loving relationship with her father. Shanda was described by friends, family, and teachers as outgoing, bright, and full of life. She was warm and friendly, with a kindness that radiated. She had a soft spot for animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She loved cheerleading, dancing, writing notes to her friends, and giggling with her cousins. She was close to her older sister, Paige, and adored spending time with her grandparents. In the summer of 1991, Shanda and her mother relocated from Kentucky to New Albany, Indiana, for a fresh start. Shanda was enrolled in Hazelwood Middle School, a transition that brought both opportunity and difficulty. Middle school is a complicated time for any young girl. But for Shanda, starting over in a new town and school at just 12 years old meant trying to quickly find her place in an already established social structure. At Hazelwood, Shanda stood out, not just because she was new, but because of her friendliness and bright personality. She quickly made friends. But among the friendships she formed, one in particular would have deadly consequences. Shanda met Amanda Heverin, a 14-year-old classmate, under unusual circumstances. They got into a fight, according to multiple sources, including contemporary news reports. The 2 girls clashed one day at school. The exact cause of the fight isn't entirely clear, but it was serious enough to land both of them in detention. It was in detention, ironically, where they bonded. From that moment on, Amanda and Shanda became close. They began exchanging handwritten notes, which soon grew flirty and romantic. They confided in each other. Some classmates and teachers noticed that their connection seemed intense for girls their age, even bordering on romantic. Amanda had previously been in a tumultuous and intense relationship with a 16-year-old girl named Melinda Lovelace. Melinda Lovelace was already well known in her social circle for her volatility and violent tendencies. She had a difficult home life marked by abuse and emotional instability. In her mind, Amanda was still hers. So, when she learned about Amanda's growing closeness with Shanda, she became increasingly jealous and then furious. Melinda began making open threats toward Shanda. She told friends she wanted to hurt her. She reportedly said things like, "She's stealing Amanda from me. I'll make her pay." This wasn't just petty middle school jealousy. This was full-blown obsession, and it was escalating. Things came to a head in October 1991, just weeks after Shanda had started at Hazelwood. There was a school dance, a big social event for middle schoolers. Shanda, dressed up and excited, attended the dance with Amanda as her date. For her, it was probably an exciting and sweet night. But Melinda Lovelace was also at the dance, and when she saw Amanda and Shanda together, she lost it. According to reports, Melinda publicly confronted the girls and caused a scene. She was furious. Her jealousy, which had been simmering, began to boil over. This event marked a turning point. It was no longer just teenage drama. Melinda began fixating on Shanda with disturbing intensity. Over the next several weeks, Melinda's behavior became increasingly threatening. She would leave messages through mutual friends and scribbled notes. She threatened Shanda verbally and in writing. One newspaper article from the Indianapolis Star described how Melinda warned others she was going to harm Shanda, and at least one friend said they didn't take the threat seriously because they didn't believe a teenage girl could actually do something so violent. But behind the scenes, Shanda was scared. Her mother, Jackie Vaught, noticed a change in her. Shanda seemed more withdrawn, more nervous. She started asking not to go to school. She didn't tell her mother everything, but Jackie could sense that something was wrong. Fearing for her daughter's well-being, Jackie made a decision. In late November 1991, she pulled Shanda out of Hazelwood Middle School and transferred her to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, a private Catholic school nearby. She hoped this would give Shanda a safer environment, away from the tensions and the threats. At first, it seemed like the right choice. Shanda began to settle in. She was still writing notes to Amanda, and the two maintained contact through letters and occasional phone calls. But now, with Shanda out of the public eye, Melinda's obsession began to twist into something even darker. In the weeks leading up to her murder, Shanda had no idea that Melinda was still watching, still listening, still plotting. While she was spending time with her family, enjoying holidays, going to school, and trying to live a normal 12-year-old's life, a plan was forming in the background, one that would culminate in one of the most gruesome child murders the state of Indiana had ever seen. In the days before her death, there were no obvious signs of what was coming. That's what makes this case so heartbreaking. Shanda was just beginning her life. She was still playing with her dog, still talking about boys and crushes, still writing in her journal and helping her mom around the house. She was an innocent, and her life was about to be stolen by girls barely older than she was. What makes the murder of Shanda Sharer so haunting is not just its brutality, but the fact that it was carried out by 4 teenage girls. This was not a random act of violence. It was a premeditated, coordinated killing, planned and executed by girls between the ages of 15 and 17. Most people, investigators included, couldn't wrap their heads around how teens, especially girls, could commit such a sadistic crime. To understand how this happened, we need to look closely at who these 4 were: Melinda Lovelace, Laurie Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Tony Lawrence. Each came from vastly different backgrounds, but each brought something to the table that made the murder possible: manipulation, rage, fear, or blind loyalty. Let's start with the one who orchestrated it all. Melinda Lovelace was born in October 1975, making her 16 at the time of Shanda Sharer's murder. By all accounts, Melinda was intelligent, sharp-tongued, and often the dominant personality in any group. But beneath that surface was a life of severe trauma and emotional instability. Melinda's home life was toxic and volatile. Her father, Larry Lovelace, was a deeply abusive man, not just emotionally and physically, but, as court records and family statements confirmed, sexually abusive as well. Melinda was just 5 when she first started experiencing trauma at his hands. He was eventually arrested for molestation charges, but the damage had already been done. Newspaper archives, including coverage from the Tipton County Tribune and the South Bend Tribune, described Melinda's deepening emotional issues, which began in early adolescence. She struggled with identity, sexuality, and anger. She had a history of violence, once pulling a knife on a classmate. She dabbled in the occult. She once threatened to kill herself in front of friends, but most of all, Melinda was obsessive, particularly when it came to her romantic relationships, and her most intense attachment was to Amanda Hevrin. When Amanda began distancing herself and showing affection toward Shanda Sharer, Melinda couldn't let go. Her jealousy curdled into hatred. She reportedly said she wanted to get rid of Shanda, and in the weeks leading up to the murder, her threats became more frequent and more disturbing. Friends dismissed them as dramatic talk, but Melinda wasn't just talking, she was planning. Laurie Tackett, born in October 1974, was 17, the oldest of the group. She was also the most volatile and psychologically disturbed. Laurie had a long history of mental illness. According to police reports and media coverage from sources like the Indianapolis Star and Indiana Gazette, Laurie had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and had spent time in psychiatric institutions. She had self-harmed, attempted suicide, and was reportedly fascinated with death, witchcraft, and the occult. Her relationship with her parents, especially her deeply religious mother, was strained. Laurie often ran away from home, and when she stayed with friends, she would tell disturbing stories and display violent tendencies. One classmate recalled her saying she wanted to watch someone scream while dying. Laurie and Melinda met through mutual friends who shared an interest in goth subculture, the occult, and rebellion. They weren't close at first, but Melinda knew Laurie had a dark side. And when Melinda told Laurie about her obsession with Amanda and her hatred of Shanda, Laurie didn't hesitate. Instead of backing away, she encouraged it. It was Laurie who brought a knife, Laurie who egged Melinda on, and ultimately, Laurie who escalated the violence on the night of the murder. Some experts later said that Melinda's rage needed Laurie's instability, that without Laurie, the plan might never have gone beyond angry talk. Hope Rippey, born in June 1976, was just 15 years old when she helped abduct and kill Shanda Sharer. Hope came from a relatively stable home. Her parents were divorced, but she had supportive adults in her life. There were no major red flags, no history of violence or psychiatric treatment. But Hope was a follower. She had a history of being easily influenced by dominant personalities, and in this case, that was Laurie Tackett. Laurie and Hope had grown close, bonding over music, rebellion, and talk of supernatural things. When Laurie suggested they help Melinda scare Shanda, Hope agreed without fully questioning it. But Hope didn't just go along for the ride. On the night of the murder, she helped lure Shanda out of her house. She helped tie her up. She participated in the psychological torture and stabbing, and she was there when Shanda was set on fire, even returning to the scene with the group to watch her burn. Later, in court, her defense argued that she was manipulated and scared, but the facts showed that Hope had multiple opportunities to back out, and didn't. Tony Lawrence, also 15, was perhaps the only one of the 4 who showed early signs of remorse. Like Hope, Tony came from a divided home and was struggling to find her identity. She had been abused in the past and was considered vulnerable. Her connection to the others came through Laurie Tackett. She looked up to Laurie and wanted to be accepted. On the night of the murder, Tony was part of the group that drove to Shanda's house. She was present at the witch's castle, an abandoned structure where the girls first terrorized Shanda. According to reports from the Star Press and the Courier-Journal, Tony was the only one who went to police with her parents and broke the silence, a move that helped investigators quickly arrest the others. Though Tony was part of the group, her emotional reaction and early cooperation would later influence her sentencing. January 10th, 1992. It was a Friday night, and 12-year-old Shanda Sharer was spending the weekend with her father, Stephen Sharer, in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Her parents were divorced, and Shanda often split time between households. Outside, a car was making its way toward her neighborhood. Inside were the four girls: Melinda Lovelace, Laurie Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Tony Lawrence. Their destination was Shanda's house. Their mission, to scare her, or so they told themselves. But Melinda had something far darker in mind. Earlier that day, the four girls had gathered at Laurie Tackett's house. Melinda had brought a knife and hidden it under a blanket in the back seat of Laurie's beat-up car. She had told the others repeatedly that she wanted to hurt, even kill, Shanda Sharer for stealing Amanda Haverin's affection. As they drove to Jeffersonville, Melinda Lovelace hid herself under a blanket in the back seat, clutching a kitchen knife. It was around 12:30 a.m., now the early hours of January 11th, when they arrived at Shanda's home. Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence walked up to the door. They rang the bell, and Shanda, unaware of what was happening, answered. Hope and Tony told her that Amanda Haverin was at a party and wanted to see her. Shanda, likely caught off guard and intrigued, asked them to come back in a little while so she could change her clothes. The girls circled the block. When they returned around 1 a.m., Shanda came out again and she climbed into the car. She never saw Melinda, still hidden, as they pulled away from the curb. As they drove, the car headed toward Utica, Indiana, and an old, abandoned stone building locals referred to as Witch's Castle. Teens often visited the ruin at night, drawn by its eerie look and urban legends. During the drive, Melinda finally revealed herself. She sprang up from under the blanket, knife in hand, and pressed it to Shanda's throat. Shanda was terrified. Melinda began screaming at her, threatening to slit her throat and accusing her of ruining her life. According to witness statements and police files referenced in your uploaded sources, the girls began mocking Shanda, demanding her belongings, and terrorizing her as they pulled up to the site. Once there, they dragged her from the car and marched her into the ruins, bound her hands with rope, and taunted her. They ripped off her jewelry. They mocked her fear. They told her she was going to die. It wasn't just bullying. It was systematic, psychological torture. But the horror was only beginning. After the initial terror at Witch's Castle, the girls threw Shanda, still bound, back into the car and began driving again. Shanda begged to be let go. Instead, Melinda and Laurie drove to a remote area. They forced Shanda out of the car and beat her again. Melinda tried to cut her throat, but the knife was too dull. So they switched tactics. Laurie Tackett stabbed Shanda in the chest multiple times, while Melinda strangled her with a rope. Convinced she was dead, they put her back in the trunk. But she wasn't. As they drove to a nearby gas station, they began to hear moaning and thumping from the trunk. Shanda was still alive. At approximately 4 a.m., they pulled into a gas station in Madison, Indiana. Court testimony and news reports confirmed that they purchased gasoline, filling a 2-liter soda bottle with fuel. They laughed about the noises coming from the trunk. While one girl went inside for a soda, the others talked casually, as if this night was just a twisted adventure. After leaving the gas station, the girls drove out to a secluded rural area off Lemon Road, near Laurie's father's property, where there was a clearing and access to open ground. They dragged Shanda, still breathing, barely alive, beaten, bloodied and half-naked, out of the trunk. She could no longer speak. She had been stabbed, strangled and beaten with a tire iron. Melinda and Laurie poured the gasoline over her face and body. Then, without hesitation, they lit her on fire. According to court records, Shanda was still alive when the match was struck. Her body was engulfed in flames. But even then, it wasn't over. After leaving her burning in the field, the girls drove away, only to return minutes later to pour more gasoline on her remains, ensuring nothing would be left. They laughed. After murdering a 12-year-old, they stopped at McDonald's for breakfast. They joked about the smell in the car, which was coming from the trunk, now stained with Shanda's blood. Later that morning, the girls split up. Hope and Laurie went to sleep at Laurie's house. Melinda went to see Amanda Heverin. She told Amanda what they had done. Amanda was shocked, but she did not go to the police. It took 8 hours from the time she was lured from her father's doorstep to the moment she died. 8 hours of fear, 8 hours of torture. Shanda begged for her life. She cried, she screamed, and the people hurting her, people she had never wronged, laughed. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. This was premeditated, prolonged, and incomprehensibly cruel. The morning of January 11th, 1992, began like any other for local Madison resident Donnie Smith, who was out hunting with a friend near Lemon Road when he stumbled upon what he first believed was a burned mannequin lying in a remote field. But as he approached, the gruesome reality set in. He was staring at the charred remains of a human being. The body was burned nearly beyond recognition, arms drawn up tightly to the chest in a fetal position, a melted shoe embedded into the scorched dirt. Horrified, he immediately contacted the authorities. Law enforcement arrived quickly, and what they found was something no one was prepared for. It was a young female, doused in gasoline and set ablaze while still alive. Her face was destroyed by fire, her body battered and stabbed, and she had suffered unimaginable pain in her final hours. Without identification, they couldn't immediately determine who she was. Meanwhile, about 40 miles away, 15-year-old Tony Lawrence was struggling to keep the secret of what had happened that night. Racked with guilt and horror over what she had witnessed, and overwhelmed by fear, Tony told her mother what had happened. Her parents immediately brought her to the Jefferson County Police Station. There, in the presence of her mother and a detective, Tony voluntarily confessed to everything she knew. She named the other 3 girls involved, Melinda Lovelace, Laurie Tackett, and Hope Rippey, and described in chilling detail how they had lured Shanda Sharer from her father's house, tortured her for hours, and burned her alive. Tony admitted that although she had not physically participated in the worst parts of the attack, she had been present, had witnessed everything, and had done nothing to stop it. Her statement gave police the information they needed to act fast. Within hours, officers were knocking on doors and taking the others into custody. The autopsy confirmed the worst. Shanda had suffered multiple stab wounds, beatings, partial strangulation, and 3rd and 4th degree burns. Most shockingly, she had still been alive when she was set on fire. Investigators recovered physical evidence from Laurie Tackett's car, including bloody socks, a knife, hair strands, and melted fabric. The statements from the girls matched the evidence. Melinda and Laurie confessed soon after their arrests, admitting to their roles in the torture and murder. Hope Rippey also gave a statement. Amanda Heverin, the girl at the center of the jealousy that led to Shanda's death, was brought in for questioning and revealed that Melinda had told her everything, even showing her a bloodied sock after the crime. But Amanda had not contacted the police. In the days that followed, the community struggled to make sense of what had happened. 4 teenage girls, one of them only 15 years old, had planned and executed one of the most disturbing child murders in Indiana history. The trial for the murder of Shanda Sharer began to take shape almost immediately after the arrests. The sheer brutality of the case, combined with the fact that all 4 perpetrators were teenage girls, made it one of the most horrifying and high-profile juvenile cases in Indiana's history. Prosecutors charged all 4 girls, Melinda Loveless, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Tony Lawrence, as adults. They faced charges including murder, arson, criminal confinement, and aggravated battery. The state of Indiana, deeply shaken by the crime, prepared for trial, but ultimately none of the girls went through a full jury trial. Each of them accepted plea bargains to avoid the death penalty or life without parole. Tony Lawrence was the first to confess and cooperate. She had shown remorse early on, distanced herself from the most violent acts, and had not physically participated in the final stages of the murder. Her attorneys argued that she was manipulated and emotionally overwhelmed. In 1993, she accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 20 years in prison for criminal confinement with the possibility of parole. Hope Rippey, who had actively helped lure Shanda and later participated in the burning, was charged with murder and arson. She too took a plea deal and was sentenced to 60 years in prison, with 10 years suspended and some time on probation. Her defense claimed she had been manipulated by older, dominant figures and lacked the maturity to understand what she was a part of. Lori Tackett, who was arguably the most violent besides Melinda, responsible for stabbing Shanda and beating her with a tire iron, was sentenced to 60 years in prison for murder. In her psychiatric evaluations, she was found to have a long history of mental health issues, including borderline personality disorder and delusions. Her fascination with death and violence had been well documented prior to the murder, and the court ultimately agreed she was a danger to society. Finally, Melinda Loveless, the ringleader whose jealousy and manipulation fueled the entire crime, was also sentenced to 60 years in prison. The court heard how she had planned the murder in advance, brought the knife, directed the abduction, and poured gasoline over Shanda's body as she was still alive. Though she was just 16 at the time of the crime, the court treated her as an adult. During sentencing, the judge described the crime as the most cruel, evil, and senseless act he had ever encountered. A powerful and heartbreaking moment came during the victim impact statements when Shanda's mother, Jacqueline Vaught, spoke directly to the court. She described the unimaginable pain of losing a child, the nightmares she suffered, and how she would never again hear her daughter's voice. She told the courtroom how she had to identify her daughter by dental records, how her last memories of Shanda were of her tiny, burned body lying in a morgue. None of the girls showed significant emotion during sentencing, although their attorneys expressed remorse on their behalf. Public reaction to the sentences was mixed. Some people, especially those following the case nationally, believed the girls deserved harsher punishment. Others pointed to their age and deeply troubled backgrounds as reasons for rehabilitation. In the years after the trial, the case continued to stir debates about the juvenile justice system, mental health, and whether people who commit monstrous acts as teens can truly change. The trial didn't provide closure, but it did deliver justice in the eyes of the law. The girls were sent to Indiana correctional facilities to begin serving their sentences. In the years following the trial, each of the 4 perpetrators began to serve her sentence in separate Indiana correctional facilities. Over time, some of the girls pursued GEDs or participated in therapy. Tony Lawrence, the least physically involved and the most remorseful, was released in 2000 after serving 9 years. Hope Rippey was released in 2006 after a successful petition to modify her sentence. Lori Tackett was released in 2018 after serving more than 25 years. The last to be released was Melinda Loveless, the mastermind, who walked out of prison in September 2019, almost 28 years after the murder. Their releases sparked renewed outrage and sorrow, particularly from Shanda's family, who felt that no sentence could match what had been done to their daughter. And yet, in one of the most extraordinary turns of the case, Shanda's mother, Jackie, publicly forgave one of the girls, Melinda Loveless. In a moment that shocked many, Jackie not only forgave Melinda, but even partnered with her on a project involving abused dogs, helping inmates train rescue animals for adoption. Jackie said she did it not for Melinda, but for herself, for healing. Shanda Sharer was 12 years old. She loved animals. She wrote notes to her friends. She laughed loudly, danced freely, and had her whole life ahead of her. Her name should not be remembered for the evil that ended her life, but for the light she brought into it. As you leave this video, remember her not as a headline, but as a human being, and let her story serve as a reminder of how deeply we must care for, watch over, and protect our children from others, and sometimes even from themselves.